So what I wanted to do was bring to you 5 challenges out of the nuclear deterrence realm, give you a little bit of the history of how U.S. nuclear policy and strategy has been made, explain a little bit about the Obama administration approach, but alert you to my view that these are challenges that you're going to, if you stick in the field you're in, these are challenges that you're going to have through your careers. The nuclear shadow is long. It was fair to say that 10, 15 years ago it was receding as the Cold War receded, as Cold War nuclear arsenals were shrinking, as political relations were improving, as non-proliferation regime was extended in 1995, but not today. And I would say this is the fundamental difference between Dr. Perry's view of this and mine. I think he sees the opportunity of a pathway forward where the role of these weapons in the international system recedes. And I think we are more likely moving into a world in which they play a continuing, different, changing role, nothing like the standoff of the Cold War, very different, but still very dangerous, particularly for us. So with that, let me thank you for your attention and open up the discussion to questions.
So my question sort of goes on to the 5th point, sort of pushing more into the extended deterrence. And the standpoint I'm coming from is that we've only used nuclear weapons as a weapon once, and when we did, sorry, twice, but in the same sort of sphere, and the context was a total war, and even then it was controversial, and even then we tried to justify it in the aftermath, and there was a lot of controversy about that in retrospect, and those were not even as powerful as the ones we have today. So my question is, are nuclear weapons themselves a myth by being weapons? For instance, extended deterrence talks about the credibility, even mutually assured protectance says that nuclear weapons are weapons such that they can be used as weapons. And extended deterrence has that sort of thing, but say China has recently created a new holiday for the Nanjing massacre and various other things. If China simply just invades Japan and say, are we going to bomb China? Probably not, if it was this controversial. And my question is, why do we believe the myth that nuclear weapons will ever be used, ever, at any purpose? And sort of correlated to this question is that the article talked about, so the Nuclear Posture Review talked about nuclear terrorism as one reason why we might be just concerned about proliferation, because even if no one uses it, and it is a myth, maybe a terrorist would. And I would like to see how credible that actually is. Can a terrorist get their hands on nuclear weapons? Would they use it? Is there such a thing as a nuclear weapon?
So I've been asked to recite the questions for the recording, and I'm not sure how I would do that. I think there are two main questions, which is, would terrorists ever really, could they employ a nuclear weapon? And secondly, given the political unusability of nuclear weapons, aren't they really just a myth in our security strategy? To the first question, I would refer you to RAND analyst Brian Jenkins, who wrote a very famous essay in the 1970s about nuclear terrorism, in which he said, we're going to worry a lot about this, but the fact is terrorists are very unlikely to employ weapons of mass destruction, because it's not about killing people, it's about political theater. They want a lot of people watching and not a lot of people dead. And there is something called killing too many. And you know, it's interesting that for decades we've worried about nuclear terrorism, bioterrorism, chemterrorism, and there's been very little. And it's certainly the case that terrorists have been capable of killing more people than they have. And the question today is, does Al-Qaeda see this differently? And I think there's a lot of evidence they do see it differently. We worry about the individual incident of a weapon that's been stolen. I would also worry about, Al-Qaeda thinks strategically, or at least its leadership groups think strategically, and think more about campaigns of violence than individual acts. I would worry about their thinking about a campaign of nuclear violence that they believe would change the flow of history. Not just inflict harm, change the flow of history. And do they really think that way? I don't know, and I wish we knew. But I think we know enough to be trying to work the problem. Part of the value of nuclear weapons is their mythic quality. They exist in order to never use them. But for deterrence to be credible, you have to have a plausible strategy for their use. This is the dilemma. The United States would employ nuclear weapons only if, in utter last resort, if every other means have failed, and in order to signal to an adversary that they have crossed some huge red line, done damage to a vital interest of ours or an ally's, and if they, okay, and you've miscalculated. Now, if you don't back down, then we can really continue this. It would be a signal of our resolve in order to influence their decision to stop. I find it, I mean, I think the United States is the last of all of the countries likely to employ a nuclear weapon, in part because I think our threats are credible. What worries me, so you would have perhaps seen some work by Thomas Schelling, one of the clearest thinkers about nuclear strategy. And Schelling argues that new nuclear states go through a learning curve. It takes about 20 years to get socialized to having these weapons. And you start out by thinking they're just bigger and better bombs, and they're all, and if you don't believe this, read the captured document from the Iraqi military, 1988, the description of what Iraq would do with nuclear weapons. And it says, these are bigger bombs. These are nothing more than bigger bombs. And do we know that Kim Jong-un is on the learning curve? I don't. Do we know that the Iranians are on the learning curve? I think so. I think they would be very careful with this capability. But if Iran and North Korea have these weapons, I mean, well, where does it stop? So I think the United States is the least likely to employ, in part because the mythic quality of our deterrent is so potent. Next, in the back.
I know SDI was abandoned kind of in the late 1980s because it was deemed more as a reason to build a nuclear arsenal, but I mean, you would allude to the fact that China is building its nuclear missile capabilities, and one would have to assume that technology has become more advanced over the last 20 or 30 years. Do you ever foresee something like an SDI being a possibility, or is it really something of a myth?
Well, SDI was the Strategic Defense Initiative. The question was, is SDI plausible? Is a missile defense Astrodome over America possible? Is Star Wars possible? Well, in a future in which we have directed energy weapons, maybe. And I have no idea how proximate that future is, but I'd say it's not soon. It's measured in decades. We do have a missile defense posture of the American homeland today. Since the first North Korean long-range missile test in 1998, I think it was, it has been the law of the land that the United States would, and by that I mean the Congress passed a one-sentence law that said it's the policy of the United States to deploy at the earliest possible moment a missile defense that will provide protection against limited strikes. The United States has not sought protection against large strikes from countries like Russia and China. That's beyond our technical means, and if we were to do so, it would be proof of their theory that we seek absolute security, to go back to that point. And there would be an arms race response, and that wouldn't be helpful. And it'd be darn expensive. But we do seek robust protection from the strikes of the kind that North Korea or Iran might make. And we currently have 30 missile interceptors deployed, 4 at Vandenberg Air Force Base and 26 in Alaska, and we're headed up to the number of 44. And these are intended to essentially address that decoupling problem I talked about. If the Japanese or South Koreans worry that we can be scared away by the threat of one nuclear strike on America, then by effectively taking the credibility of that threat off the table because we can protect ourselves from 1 or 2 or 3, well, we've done something about the credibility of our posture. The missile defense discussion today also includes an important component about regional missile defense. We work with our allies in Northeast Asia and Europe and the Middle East to deploy missile defenses, again, against limited strikes. China can crank out a lot more short-range missiles than we can crank out defenses against them. So too Iran. But the ability to provide some protection to cities, to bases, to our own strike capabilities. If they start a war, we want to be able to strike back. These are strategic values of regional ballistic missile defense. So Star Wars is a long way away, but missile defense in America's overall strategic posture is here and now.
So if I'm correct, the nuclear posture review says that the United States would ratify the comprehensive test ban treaty. Obviously, that hasn't happened yet. Do you think that there's a chance that that treaty could be ratified in the future, and what effect do you think that would have on the United States' relations with other nations that have signed the CTBT or CTBT?
The future is a long time. The current Congress is not going to ratify. Anything that looks like the current Congress is not going to ratify. It used to be the case that when major arms control treaties reached the Senate, half to two-thirds of both parties would support the treaty after a debate. The New START treaty negotiated by the Obama administration, doing exactly what the Perry-Schlesinger Commission told it to seek in negotiating, was supported by every Republican Secretary of State living, every Republican Secretary of Defense living, every former commander of Strategic Command, and by 13 Republicans in the Senate. It became a partisan issue. And the administration's original thinking was that we would have a successful ratification of New START because it would enjoy bipartisan support. It did enjoy bipartisan support, just not from Republican senators. And that ratification process would then lay the groundwork for Senate review. The Senate has reviewed and rejected CTBT in the 1990s. We thought this would lay the groundwork. Didn't happen. Not going to happen. No votes. So oddly, in international law, if you sign a treaty but don't ratify it, you're still obliged to comply with it. And so we're sort of half in, half out. The treaty itself doesn't enter into force legally until a whole bunch of countries ratify it. They're not going to until we do. But they're kind of bound by it too. But bear in mind the example of the Geneva Protocol of 1925. So after World War I, diplomats sat down and they first of all tried to ban the entire arms trade. Well, that was a little overly ambitious. But then it proved possible to agree to an international ban on the use of chemical weapons, which the United States signed and ratified in the Gerald Ford administration 50 years later. In the interim, the Geneva Protocol was an important inhibitor on the employment of chemical weapons, particularly in World War II, although in other regional conflicts. So maybe this is a model. The CTBT will be around for a long time, and maybe there will be a changed international circumstance that will compel a re-look by Republicans in the Senate.
About the time you were writing the new report was right around Russia and Georgia. Can you talk about how that incident influenced, if at all, the way you treat Russia in the report?
Yeah, that's a great question. The impact of the Russia-Georgia war on the writing of the Nuclear Posture Review. I would say, speaking for myself, although being aware that the camera's rolling, President Obama came in as a part of the wave of reaction to the Bush years, which Vice President Cheney summed up perfectly the vision of leadership that they had, which was, we will exercise power, others will want to follow. Didn't work out that way. And President Obama had a different vision of leadership, which is we would motivate leadership from others while exercising our own through collaborative processes and different alliance relationships and different bilateral relationships. I would say there was a cautious optimism about our ability to work with Russia and China by hitting reset. and the optimism quickly attenuated. But your question is, so what for our nuclear posture? The basic reason we have the nuclear posture we do, its overall size and shape, is because Russia has the size and shape nuclear posture it has. And largely these are Cold War leftovers. So if they would agree to reduce their nuclear arsenal in parallel for our reductions, we could continue to eliminate extra nuclear weapons capabilities without fundamentally changing the strategic relationship, except we're gaining confidence in our ability to do things. And it hasn't worked out that way. And Kosovo, Georgia was just another data point that things with Putin had not gotten better. So I think we're at the end. One more minute. One more quick question.
When you talk about new nuclear technology, what would that look like as opposed to the nuclear technology we already have, and how would that enhance our capabilities and not destroy the entire world?
So the question is, what would new nuclear weapons look like, and why would it make any difference when we can already destroy the world? This goes to the core of the debate between this camp and this camp. New nuclear weapons would, what they would like to have are two new weapons. One to go after the tunneling that's been done in every country in the world that fears American air power. And the other is the ability to deliver a weapon of relatively low yield quite promptly somewhere. Right now, the only option the President has to deliver a nuclear weapon on North Korea quickly is a really big one, which might produce more downwind hazard in South Korea and Japan than in North Korea. Are those worth the cost politically to getting them? My assessment is no. So let me thank you all for your time and attention. I hope this was stimulating. Good luck to you.